It was almost 11 when the knock came. The rain had just stopped, and the street outside still held it. The lamplight smeared long and yellow across the wet pavement. I opened the door, and there she was, Kyle's mother, a suitcase in one hand, and that old blue dish held against her chest with the other, held the way a person holds the last solid thing they own. The porch light fell soft on her tired face. Cold air slipped past her into the hall. She looked at me a long moment before she spoke. "I'm sorry to come like this, Adam," she said. "I have nowhere else to go. My name is Adam Reeves. That autumn I was 33, and for 2 years I had lived alone in a small house on the east side of Boise, a place I was fixing up slowly with my own 2 hands. There were rooms in it that still smelled of raw lumber. I liked it that way. I liked the quiet of a house that was becoming something instead of already being finished. I'm a firefighter, a paramedic too, which mostly means that when the worst night of somebody's life is happening, I'm one of the people who shows up in the dark and stands very still and steady behind them while it does. You learn to be the calm thing in the room. I was good at it for other people. I was less good at doing it for myself. 2 years before that night, my marriage had ended. I won't dress it up. Megan and I had wanted different lives, and somewhere along the way we stopped pretending we didn't. We had no children. When it was over, it was very over, and the house I bought afterward was the first thing in a long time that was only mine. Kyle Dunlap was my best friend. We'd met 7 years earlier at the academy, 2 guys sweating through the same drills, and something about us just fit the way it does, once or twice in a life, with a person you don't have to explain yourself to. His family took me in without asking whether I needed taking in, and when his father, Ray, died 5 years back, a heart attack, sudden, on an ordinary Tuesday, I was the one standing next to Kyle at the graveside, and I was the one who kept coming around the house afterward, fixing the gutter, carrying the heavy things, sitting with his mother, Ellen, in the long quiet that grief leaves behind. That was how I became something like family to the Dunlaps, not by decision, by showing up. And there was the dish. After my divorce, when I was living on cold cereal and whatever I could heat in one pan, meals started appearing on my porch, always in the same blue ceramic dish, plain and a little chipped at one edge, and never with a note. I knew whose it was. I'd wash it clean and leave it on the Dunlap's step, and a week later it would come back full. We never once spoke about it. It became a kind of language between us, that dish going back and forth, a way of saying someone is thinking of you without either of us having to stand there and say it out loud. People call me when things are on fire. Ellen was the first person who ever showed up at my door because something in her life had already burned down. I brought her inside. I took the suitcase from her hand and set it by the stairs, and I put the kettle on because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. The little wood stove I'd been feeding all evening popped and settled. She sat at my kitchen table with the blue dish in front of her, both hands around it, and she told me what had happened, or part of it. She'd been staying with her sister, Sharon, ever since she'd sold the family home, she said. It was never meant to be forever. Tonight there had been a dinner, and things had been said, the kind that can't be unsaid, and she couldn't stay under that roof another night. Kyle was 3 weeks into a wildfire deployment out of state, somewhere with bad cell service and worse hours, and she didn't want to be one more weight on him from 1,000 miles away. A hotel, she let that thought go unfinished, and I understood the shape of what she didn't say, so she had come here. Because I was practically family, because there was nowhere else. I believed her. Every word of it was true, and I believed it, and I did not think for 1 second to ask whether true and the whole truth were the same thing. We argued, gently, about where she'd sleep. She insisted on the couch. I insisted she take the room. In the end, I won, the way you win with someone too tired to keep refusing, and I carried her suitcase up and turned down the bed and told her the water ran hot if she gave it a minute. The first few days had a strange, careful softness to them, like we were both walking around something neither of us wanted to name. She cooked. Of course she cooked. I think it was the only way she knew to earn a place she'd been given for free. That blue dish, which for 2 years had only ever crossed my threshold covered in foil and left on the step, came all the way into my kitchen now and stayed there. She'd fill it and bake it and set it in the middle of the table, and we'd eat across from each other in the yellow light of 6 o'clock, and for a little while the house didn't feel like a project I was building alone. It felt lived in. The windows over the sink would fog with steam. The whole place would smell of onions going soft in a pan, of bread warming, of a kitchen finally being used for the first time in years. Some nights she'd hum while she worked, low, a tune I didn't know, and stop the second she noticed she was doing it. She'd wipe the blue dish dry afterward and set it back in my cupboard like it had always lived there, and every time, I told myself that meant nothing. She helped me with the house, too. She was good with her hands in a way that surprised me, steady on a ladder, unafraid of a paintbrush. We spent one whole Saturday stripping old varnish off the banister, the smell of it sharp in the air, our sleeves pushed up, neither of us saying much, the work filling the silence for us. I'd forgotten what it was to have another person move through my rooms, to hear a second set of footsteps on the stairs, to not be the only one who turned off the lights at night. I'd come home from a 24-hour shift wrung out in gray, and the kitchen window would be lit from inside, gold against the dark, and something in my chest would loosen before I'd even killed the engine. I didn't let myself look too closely at what that was. In the evenings, after the dishes were done, she'd read in the corner chair, and I'd work on some small repair, and we wouldn't talk for an hour at a stretch, and it was the easiest silence I'd known in years. The turn of a page, the house settling, her breathing gone slow, and even when she'd drifted off without meaning to, I'd sit there and let myself have it, that ordinary peace, and then I'd remember what it was, and make myself stop. And in all of it, there were things I noticed and didn't let myself think about, like how she never quite said why she'd come here. She'd told me the true reasons, Sharon, the dinner, Kyle away, and every one of them held up. But there's a difference between the reason a person gives and the reason underneath it. And some part of me could feel the second thing without being able to name it. She would look at me a beat too long across the table and then look away. She would go quiet when I came into a room, the particular quiet of someone rearranging her face before she turns around. She laughed more easily at my worst jokes than they deserved. She remembered how I took my coffee without ever having been told. She left the porch light on for me when I worked late, and once turned my collar down without thinking, the way you do for someone who's yours, and caught herself, and stepped back. None of it was anything. All of it was everything. I filed each one away and pretended I hadn't. Kyle texted her one evening. I saw it happen, saw her phone light up on the counter, saw his name, saw her turn it face down without answering. Later that night I heard her out on the back step, phone to her ear, her voice low. I'm fine, honey. I'm staying with a friend. Don't worry about me, you keep your head on that fire. She didn't tell him where she was. She didn't tell him whose friend. I didn't understand yet why she wouldn't just say it. Why staying with Adam was a sentence she couldn't seem to put in her son's ear. I told myself she was only protecting him from worry, that a man in a fire camp doesn't need to be picturing his mother's whole life falling apart back home. That was probably even part of it. But I know now it was never the whole of it, and I think, somewhere down in a place I wasn't looking, I knew it then, too, because I was starting to feel something I had no business feeling. She was Kyle's mother. She was older than me by nearly 20 years. Every rule I could name, spoken and unspoken, told me that whatever was warming up in my chest when she laughed at something I said, when she fell asleep on the couch with a book open on her knee, when I came home from a shift and the kitchen light was on for me, every rule said no. Not this, not her, not allowed. And so I did what I'm good at. I stood very still and steady behind the feeling and did not let it show, and I told myself that if I never named it, it wasn't real. I'd catch myself, though, Driving home from the station, I'd notice I was hurrying, and I'd have to ask myself why. Standing in the grocery store, I'd find myself reaching for the coffee she liked without deciding to. Little things. The kind of things that give you away before you've admitted anything, even to yourself. The neighborhood noticed before I did. Boise's a city, but the block I live on is a small town, all its own. Old Mrs. Colby 2 doors down misses nothing, and what she doesn't miss, she shares. I felt the look start. A car in my driveway that wasn't mine. A woman's silhouette in my kitchen window at night. Nobody said anything to my face. Not yet, but I could feel the story assembling itself out there in the space between porches, and I found I didn't much care what shape it took. That should have told me something. A man who truly had nothing to hide wouldn't have needed to work so hard at not caring. One night we were doing the dishes side by side, her washing, me drying, the blue dish between us in the rack, and our hands touched under the water. Just for a second, neither of us moved. The faucet ran. Somewhere outside a dog barked and went quiet. And then she pulled her hand back and said something bright and ordinary about the weather, and I dried the same plate 3 times, and the moment folded itself up and put itself away, and we both pretended it hadn't happened, but it had happened. And after that, the careful softness in the house had a current running under it. A low, steady pull that neither of us was talking about and both of us could feel every time we passed in the hall, every time she handed me a plate, every time the house went quiet at the end of a day. I told myself, still, that I was the only one carrying it, that she was grieving and grateful and nothing more. It's easier to bear a thing alone if you can convince yourself it only lives in you. She'd been with me 2 weeks by then. 2 weeks of her meals in the blue dish, 2 weeks of her footsteps on my stairs, 2 weeks of me telling myself a story about family and duty and being a good friend to Kyle. It was a good story. I almost believed it. I know now that she had a truer one, and that she was holding it the same way she'd held that dish on my porch the first night pressed to her chest, both hands, like the last solid thing she owned. She wasn't ready to set it down, and I wasn't ready to see it. We were both just waiting, though we'd never have said so, for something to come along and force the thing out into the open. It came, it usually does, and when it came wearing a face I knew all too well. The knock, this time, came in daylight. I was off shift, up on a ladder in the front room replacing a light fixture, when I heard it, 3 sharp raps, impatient, already annoyed at having to wait. I came down and opened the door, and there was Megan on my step, my ex-wife, 31 years old and looking at me like no time had passed at all. I hadn't seen her in the better part of 2 years. She had a way of arriving that filled a doorway, that pushed into a house ahead of her actual body. She came in without quite being invited, and her perfume came with her, sharp and expensive, and too much for a kitchen, filling the rooms behind me. She smiled at me, and it was a smile with a purpose behind it, and I felt my whole chest go careful. "Adam," she said, "you're a hard man to find." She'd fallen on a hard patch. I got that much in the first 2 minutes, because Megan has never in her life been able to sit on a thing she wants. The relationship she'd left me for had come apart. Money was tight. And now here she was, warm and rueful, telling me she'd been thinking about us lately, about how maybe we'd both been too quick, too proud, and wasn't it funny the way life brings you back around. She was circling toward asking me for something. I could see it coming the way you see weather coming. And then Ellen came out of the kitchen. She didn't do anything wrong. She just walked into the front room, drying her hands, saying my name, asking me something ordinary about dinner, and stopped when she saw we had company. That was all. But I watched Megan's face take it in. The woman in my house, the ease of it, the way Ellen already knew where things were kept. I watched her do the arithmetic, and I watched the warmth go out of her like a light switched off. "Well," Megan said slowly. Her eyes moved from Ellen to me and back. "Isn't this cozy?" I told her it wasn't what she thought. Which was true, and which is also the single most useless sentence a person can say, because the moment you say it, you've already lost. Megan's gaze traveled past us, into the kitchen, and landed on the drying rack by the sink and on the blue dish, sitting in it. Clean and upside down, so obviously at home there, under the flat white overhead light. Something clicked behind her eyes. She let out a small laugh, and it was an ugly sound, and I knew that whatever she'd come here to ask me for, she'd just decided to take something else instead. "So this is the upgrade?" she said. "Playing house with somebody's mother?" I felt Ellen go still behind me. I didn't turn around, but I felt it, the particular stillness of a person who has decided that walking out of the room would cost her more than staying in it. She set her hands flat on the counter. She did not say a word. She just held her ground in her own quiet, and something about that quiet made Megan's laugh sound even smaller and cheaper in the room. I asked Megan to leave. I said it evenly, the way I say things on the job, and after a moment she went, but she went the way a fire goes when you've only knocked it down and not put it out. Still alive somewhere. Still looking for air. She found it fast. Megan had known Kyle for years. She'd stood beside me at gatherings where he was. She had his number. She knew the shape of my whole life because for a while she'd been at the center of it. And she knew, the way people who want to hurt you always seem to know, exactly where the soft place was. That night, my phone started coming apart in my hands, buzzing again and again on the nightstand in the dark. A text from Kyle, 3 states away, at the edge of a wildfire with almost no signal. "What the hell is going on with my mom and you?" Not a question. He hadn't put a question mark on it, just those words. Cold, arriving out of the dark of a fire camp where he had no way to see the truth and every reason to fear the worst. I tried to call. It went straight to voicemail. I texted back everything I could fit into a thumbed-out message. "It's not like that." She needed a place. Let me explain, and watched it sit there. Delivered, unread, while a man I loved like a brother lay awake somewhere in the smoke thinking the worst thing he could think about the 2 people he trusted most. And it didn't stop with Kyle. Megan made calls. She talked to people who talked to people. By the end of that week, the story was loose in the world. And it had teeth now, and it had been sharpened into something that cut. In the version going around, Ellen wasn't a widow who'd lost her home and had nowhere to sleep. She was a lonely older woman who'd gotten her hooks into her son's best friend, and I wasn't a man who'd opened his door. I was something you'd say in a lower voice, at the end of a driveway, when you thought I couldn't hear. It's a strange thing, watching a life you built quietly for years get repainted by someone who was never in it. There was no single accusation to answer, nothing solid to grab, just a fog of it, thickening. Everywhere I went, I heard it reach the station. You always know, a conversation stops a half-second too late when you walk into the bay. A guy you've pulled people out of burning buildings with can't quite meet your eye at the coffee pot. Nobody accused me of anything. They didn't have to. The whispering did the work, and the whispering was patient. I could have lived with what it did to me. I'd taken worse on the job and gone back the next shift. It was what it was doing 3 states away, and 1 room away, that I couldn't stand. The worst part, the part I still can't quite forgive myself for not seeing sooner, was what it did to Ellen. She heard it. Of course she heard it. A story like that finds its way to the person it's about faster than to anyone else. I came home one evening to find her sitting very straight at the kitchen table, the blue dish empty in front of her. Her hands folded on top of each other so tightly the knuckles had gone pale. She'd set the empty dish squarely in front of her, centered, like a thing already being handed back. She had already started, in her head, to pack. I could see it. She had already begun the private work of deciding to disappear before her being here could cost me one more thing. "I should never have come," she said. Her voice was steady, which was somehow worse than if it hadn't been. "I've made a mess of your whole life in 3 weeks, and the truth, the real truth, the one Megan had taken and bent into a weapon, was still sitting there in the room with us, unspoken, waiting. It just hadn't been said out loud yet by the one person who had the right to say it. That night, she said it. She said it at that same table, late, after I'd told her plainly, and more than once that she was not going anywhere, that I would not let a lie chase her out of the one door in this city that had opened for her. She was quiet for a long time. The wood stove ticked. Out on the street, a car passed and its lights swept across the ceiling and were gone. The house was so quiet I could hear the second hand on the kitchen clock, and then she put both hands around the blue dish, the way she had that first night on the porch, and she started to talk. "I told myself I came here because I had nowhere to go," she said. That was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. She told me there had been other doors that night. Sharon's, for all its trouble, had a lock she still had a key to. There were cousins across town who would have grumbled and made up the spare room. There was a motel out by the interstate that would have taken the little cash in her purse and asked no questions. She'd stood on the curb outside her sister's house with her suitcase in one hand and the blue dish in the other, and she'd run through all of them every reasonable option a sensible woman has when the roof over her head gives way, and then she'd gotten in her car and driven. Not to any of them, here, to my street, to my porch, and she'd sat at the bottom of my steps in the wet for a long time before she made herself knock, because she already knew, even then, that coming to me was not the same as coming to family. "Family is the door you're allowed to knock on," she said. "I drove past every door I was allowed to knock on, and I ended up at yours. I've turned that over 100 times, trying to make it mean something harmless. It won't. I've cared for you for a long time, Adam," she said. She looked at the table when she said it, not at me. "Longer than I let myself know. Longer than I have any right to. And I'm ashamed of it. You are my son's best friend. I'm old enough to be," she stopped. She didn't finish it, and she didn't need to. "There's no version of this where I come out looking like anything but a foolish woman who should have known better. And now it's hurting you. It's costing you, Kyle. It's costing you your good name at a job you'd walk into a fire for. That's why I have to go. Not because of what they're saying about me. Because leaving is the only thing I have left that can keep it from costing you anything more." And she began to lift the blue dish, to slide it across the table toward me, returning it. The way she'd returned it 100 times before on the Dunlap's step, only this time I understood that she meant it as goodbye. This time the dish coming back was meant to be the last of her leaving. I put my hand over hers on the rim of it. I didn't say anything grand. I'm not a man who has grand things ready. I just held her hand there, on the cool ceramic, and I stopped the dish from moving, and I made myself look, finally, at the thing I'd been standing very still behind for 3 weeks so that I'd never have to see it. I loved her. That was the whole of it. Not gratitude, not duty, not some confused loyalty to Kyle spilling over its banks. I loved the way she moved through my rooms. I loved the fog on the kitchen windows and the second set of footsteps on my stairs and the light left on for me when I came home late. I loved her, plainly, the way you love the one true thing in a life full of noise, and I'd been telling myself I didn't because a rule book I never agreed to said I wasn't allowed. 20 years. My best friend's mother. I turned each objection over in my hand, one by one, and noticed for the first time that not one of them was about her, or about me, or about anything true in that kitchen. Every one was about what other people would make of it, and I've never once let a fire go unfought because of how it would look. "Then don't return the dish," I said. "Keep it here. Stay." She finally looked up at me. "Adam," she said, very low, "do you understand what it will cost you to choose this out loud? They will not be quiet about it. Kyle may never." "Let them talk," I said. "I spend my whole life running toward the things everybody else runs away from. I'm not going to run from the one thing in it worth running toward because some people I'll never meet have opinions about it. The truth is the truth." Megan took it and bent it into a knife. "That doesn't make it any less true. It just means I have to be the one to pick it up and hold it the right way around." I didn't let go of her hand. Neither of us moved for a long moment. The dish stayed where it was, between us, mine and hers at the same time, and something in her that had been braced and folded up tight since the moment she'd stood on my porch, something in her finally, quietly, set itself down. For the first time since the knock on the door, she looked like a woman who was home, and not a woman waiting to be told to leave. I didn't say anything else. There wasn't anything else that needed saying. She didn't leave that night. She didn't leave the next one either. And in the morning, for the first time in 3 weeks, the blue dish came out of the cupboard, not because either of us was hiding behind it, but because we were hungry, and we were staying, and it was simply ours. But choosing a thing out loud and having the world make peace with it are two different journeys, and only one of them was over. Kyle came home 11 days later. I didn't wait for him to come to me. I drove out to the yard where the crews were coming back, and I stood at the edge of the lot in the early heat while the trucks unloaded. And when he climbed down filthy, hollowed out, 3 weeks of fire still on him, I was the first face he saw. He went hard when he saw me. I watched him decide, right there, whether to swing or to walk away, and in the end he did neither. He just stood there with his jaw set and waited for me to say something, because that's the kind of friend he is, even when he thinks you've wronged him. He gives you the chance to speak first, so I spoke. Right there in the gravel, with his gear at his feet and the smell of smoke coming off his jacket, I told him everything, plainly, start to finish. The dinner at Sharon's, the suitcase, the blue dish, the 3 weeks, Megan on my step and Megan on the phone. I didn't soften it and I didn't dress it up and I didn't once say it's not what you think, because I'd learned what a useless sentence that is. I told him what it actually was. I told him I loved his mother. I told him I knew every reason it was complicated and that I'd chosen it anyway, with my eyes open, and that I was sorry he'd had to hear a poisoned version of it 1,000 miles from home with no way to call. He didn't say much. He picked up his gear and said he needed time, and he got in his truck and drove off, and I let him. You don't chase a man who's just asked for room. You give it to him, and you let the truth do the slow work that truth does. It's a thing the job teaches you that nothing else does. You can't argue a person into believing you. You can only keep being who you are, in plain view, day after day, until the plain view does the arguing for you. It did take time. I won't pretend it was a handshake and all forgiven. For a while, things between Kyle and me were careful and thin, the way a rope is thin when it's frayed but hasn't parted. But he went to see his mother, and whatever passed between the two of them I've never asked, and she's never told me, and some things belong only to a mother and her son. He came out of it different, because Kyle knew 2 things no rumor could touch. He knew exactly the kind of man I am. He'd watched me be it for 7 years, in the worst rooms a person can be in, and he knew how long his mother had been alone, how quiet the house had gone after his father, how small she'd made herself living on the edge of other people's lives. He knew the loud version was a lie because he knew both of the people it was told about. The rumor, meanwhile, did what lies do when nobody feeds them. It got hungry, and it died. Captain Doyle, who'd known me since I came on, and had never once known me to lie, made it plain around the station that he didn't want to hear another word of it, and the whispering dried up almost overnight. People who'd looked away at the coffee pot started looking at me again, and Megan found that a story only has power as long as everyone agrees to be afraid of it. Once Kyle stood in that station bay and told the guys, flat out, that Adam Reeves was a better man than any of them, and they could all mind their own business about his mother well. There was nothing left for her to hold on to. She stopped calling. She drifted back out of my life the same abrupt way she'd drifted into it, and this time the door didn't even rattle when she went. What was left, when all the noise finally cleared, was the quiet thing that had been true the whole time. We took it slow. We had no reason to rush, and every reason not to. We let the neighborhood get used to the sight of us on the porch in the evenings. We ate dinner at that kitchen table in the yellow 6 o'clock light. On Saturday mornings, the house smelled of coffee, and I'd come downstairs to find her already up at the window, and it stopped being remarkable, which is its own kind of miracle, The day a thing you never thought you'd have becomes simply the shape of your ordinary life. There was no single morning it turned. That's not how it went. It turned the way a season does, without announcement, until one day you look up and it has simply become what it is. Kyle came around. Not all at once, but there was a Saturday, months later, when he showed up unannounced, and I heard his truck door slam out on the street, and my whole body braced the way it still did back then. He came up the steps. We stood there a second. He didn't shake my hand that first night at the yard, but he did, eventually that morning, on this same porch, and he held on a beat longer than a handshake needs, a beat that said everything neither of us was ever going to say out loud. That was all I'd been waiting for. I didn't need him to say he understood. The handshake said it, and Kyle was never a man for the other kind of words anyway. The years since have been quiet in the best way. That was almost 2 years ago now. The house is finished, no more rooms that smell of raw lumber, and it's a home, which is a different thing than a finished house, and I didn't finish it alone. Ellen's things live here now, not as a guests, but as a partners. And the blue dish doesn't travel anymore. It doesn't cross a threshold under foil and come back a week later empty. It lives in the cupboard over the sink, and it comes out on Sundays, and it goes back clean, and it never once has to say what it used to have to say. Someone is thinking of you because now the someone is just here. Across the table, every single day. I still think about the version of that night where I didn't open the door, where I let it be too strange, too complicated, too against the rules. That Adam is still alone in a house that smells of sawdust, and he thinks he's fine, and he has no idea what he talked himself out of. I'm the other Adam, the one who opened the door. I think about that a lot, how much of a life can turn on whether you open a door at 11 at night. She stood on my porch and told me she had nowhere else to go, and it was true, and it was also the smallest part of the truth. The real truth was quieter, and it took her weeks to say and me weeks to hear, and in between, a much louder story tried to speak over it. That's the thing I keep coming back to. The loud version got everywhere first. It got to Kyle, it got to the station, it got to strangers who repeated it like they knew. And it still lost. It lost because a lie only has as much life as the fear around it, and the truth just keeps being true, and it outlasts the noise. It always outlasts the noise. I used to think home was something you owned. She taught me it's just the one door you can knock on at 11 at night and know, without asking, that it will open. So, let me ask you 2 things, and I'd really like to know. If a truth about you got twisted into a weapon, would you stay silent to keep the peace, or would you speak up to protect it? And if someone stood at your door at 11 at night, saying they had nowhere else to go, would you open it? And would you believe their reason? If this story stayed with you, hit like, subscribe for more, and tell me in the comments, whose door would you knock on at 11 at night?